Canada's federal court slams the government for threatening Canadians' free speech rights. The Canadian Arab Federation welcomes Justice Richard Mosley's federal court ruling on Monday, September 27, 2010, that the government's decision to ban British Member of Parliament George Galloway from entering Canada in March of 2009 by labeling him a terror supporter and a national security risk had no legal basis. The federal court found that the main reason why the Harper government sought to prevent George Galloway from entering Canada was that they disagreed with his political views. Weeks before the ban, Galloway had led a humanitarian aid convoy to Gaza as part of an international campaign to break Israel's illegal and immoral blockade, and he was scheduled to appear in 4 Canadian cities on a speaking tour called Resisting War from Gaza to Afghanistan. Regrettably, the Galloway ban is not an isolated incident, but is part of a much wider pattern of government-led repression against voices in Canadian civil society that are critical of Canada's domestic and foreign policies, by cutting funding to them and or labeling them as supporters of terrorism and or being anti-Semites. These attacks on the civil liberties have had particularly devastating effects on immigrants, refugees, and religious and racial minorities targeted by racial profiling. Since coming to power in 2006, the Harper government has exercised its political power to suppress dissent through blackmail and defamation. That record includes, but is not limited to, the cutting of funding to the Canadian Arab Federation, Kairos, and Alternatives for advocating for Palestinian rights, the cutting of funding to indigenous and women groups, undermining the Rights and Democracy Agency, proroguing Parliament to avoid incriminating disclosure, refusing to fund academic conferences and Pride Toronto because of their views on Palestine-Israel, bullying students involved in Israeli Apartheid Week and other Palestine solidarity campaigns, making defamatory remarks against Arab, Muslim, labor, and other organizations that oppose Israel's violation of Palestinian rights, spending $1.2 billion to turn Toronto into an occupied city during the G20 meeting, and violating the freedom of expression of hundreds of people who were illegally detained and mistreated. The erosion of fundamental rights has led Voices, a coalition of 187 Canadian civil society organizations, to issue a declaration in June of 2010 accusing the Harper government of systematically undermining democratic institutions and practices, of eroding the protection of free speech, of eroding freedom of the press, of abusing the right to prorogue Parliament, and other fundamental human rights. The declaration also accused the Harper government of taking positions domestically and within such key international bodies as the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Human Rights Council that undermine essential human rights, international law, indigenous rights, women's rights, children's rights, and environmental and other global principles. The quality and health of democratic life in Canada is under serious threat. We join other Canadians in demanding that the government act in accordance with Canada's traditions and values by actively promoting and supporting political diversity and public debate instead of imposing conformity, said Khaled, Mouammar, Canadian Arab Federation National President.